More insight now with Brian Becker. He's the executive director of the Anti-War Answer Coalition. You have your own story. I guess you were at the Venezuelan embassy last night. What was that like?
That was a clash last night right here in Georgetown. Anti-war and peace activists have been in the Venezuelan embassy for the past 3 weeks at the invitation of the Venezuelan government. The Venezuelan government owns the building in Georgetown according to the Vienna Convention. Diplomatic compounds are inviolable. Another country, a host country, can't seize it. The Maduro government says that's precisely what the Trump administration is trying to do, is to seize the embassy here and hand it over to Juan Guaido. So peace activists were there at the invitation of the Venezuelan government. Last night, a large crowd, well, not that large, but large enough, of Guaido supporters came and basically engaged in intimidation and what can be only called an assault against people who were peacefully at the embassy at the invitation of the rightful owners of the embassy.
Let me get your take on a couple of different perspectives. John Bolton, the national security advisor for President Trump, said this: Maduro is surrounded by scorpions in a bottle. It's only a matter of time. Your take on that?
Well, John Bolton has decided that he's the master of the universe. I mean, he says the Monroe Doctrine is alive and well. Well, that was 1815, where the United States government said, we, the United States government in Washington, will determine the destiny of all of these hundreds of millions of people in Latin America. Well, it's not 1815, it's 2019, and so the U.S. is trying, country by country in Latin America, to roll back governments that were considered to be too independent from the United States, and Venezuela is the latest casualty.
So that's one perspective. Joshua Keating is a former writer, editor at Foreign Policy magazine. He wrote this piece for Slate. The headline is, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's enemies took their best shot. They missed.
Yes, they did take their best shot. They took their best shot on June 23rd. That's when Mike Pence talked to Guaido, and Guaido said, I'm the president. They tried again on February 23rd at that showdown at the Colombian border. That failed too. Yesterday was the third event. I think we're reaching a climax here. If the United States government, the Trump administration, along with Juan Guaido, says, we know who the president of Venezuela is, and it's not the people who actually voted in Venezuela last May 2018, when Juan Guaido was not participating, and yet they can't effectuate a real coup d'etat, it looks like the game might be up. That doesn't mean that Venezuela is going to be free from economic sanctions. More are coming. But I think Juan Guaido has demonstrated an inability to do what he promised Trump, Pompeo, Bolton, that he could actually topple the Maduro government by splitting the country or splitting the military. That's not going to happen.
It's interesting because Trump is threatening Cuba with an embargo, which they've been dealing with since the 1960s. There's been a lot of talk about Russia and Cuba propping up the Venezuelan government. Do you see them trying to basically have the levers of power to try and affect those two countries? What do you see the U.S. doing next?
Well, John Bolton said there's a troika of tyranny. It's Venezuela, it's Nicaragua, and it's Cuba. I think the Trump administration's game plan is to roll back or overthrow, carry out regime change against these independent countries in Latin America. They failed in Venezuela so far, so now what Trump is doing is rolling back Obama's, one of his signature foreign policy achievements, which was the beginning of normalization of relations with Cuba, and instead going back to the early 1960s, where Americans are going to not be allowed to travel to Cuba, that Cuban Americans who are trying to see their families or provide remittances are going to be deprived of that. So what Trump is doing now is maximum pressure on Cuba, because it's an ally of Venezuela, maximum pressure on Nicaragua, and also accusing Russia and China of interfering in the Western Hemisphere by saying, look, and China and Russia are doing this, they have the right to continue economic, political, and diplomatic relations with these independent governments. And so the Trump administration is threatening everybody. Stop it. You must listen to us. You must listen to Washington. I don't think anybody's going to go for that.
Well, it's a story we'll continue to follow. Always a pleasure talking to you, Brian. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.